The downtown public library had become Celeste Rivera's second home, though she wished it could be her first. Every morning at exactly 8 a.m., she would arrive with her worn backpack containing 3 notebooks, 2 pens, and a water bottle she refilled throughout the day. The librarians knew her face, but not her story, and that was exactly how she preferred it. Today was Tuesday, which meant she had exactly $12 to her name. $12 that needed to stretch until Friday, when she could pick up her paycheck from the small cafe where she worked weekend shifts. As always, she faced the same impossible choice that had defined her life for the past 8 months, by food or by the business textbook. She desperately needed for her self-designed education. The morning ritual Celeste settled into her usual spot at the corner table near the economics section. She opened her notebook and began copying passages from Modern Business Strategy, word by word. Her handwriting was neat and careful, treating each sentence like a treasure she was preserving. Other students her age were in college classrooms, but Celeste had created her own university within these walls. The hunger pangs started around 10 a.m., as they always did. She pressed her hand against her stomach and took a sip of water, hoping to quiet the rumbling. Yesterday, she had eaten a shared bag of chips with another girl at the homeless shelter. The day before, she had treated herself to a $1 menu burger. Today would be another water day. The businessman's routine, 3 blocks away. Jonathan Blake stepped out of his black sedan and handed the keys to his driver. 32, he had built Blake Innovations from a garage startup into a company worth $200 million. His morning routine was precise. Coffee at the artisan shop on 5th Street. Quick review of the morning reports, then a stop at the bookstore to pick up the latest business publications. But today, something made him change his routine. Perhaps it was the unusually warm October morning. Or maybe it was the conversation he had with his mother the night before about giving back to the community. Instead of heading to his usual bookstore, Jonathan found himself walking toward the public library. He had not been inside a public library since high school, and he was surprised by the quiet energy of the place. Students hunched over textbooks, elderly people reading newspapers, children attending story time. It reminded him why he had fallen in love with learning in the first place. Before business school and board meetings had made education feel like a commodity. The moment of discovery, Jonathan was browsing the business section when he noticed her. A young woman with dark hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a faded blue sweater that had seen better days. She was copying text from a thick book with the concentration of a monk transcribing sacred texts. What struck him was not her appearance, but her absolute focus. In a world of digital distractions, here was someone treating a book like it contained the secrets of the universe. He moved closer, pretending to search for a book while observing her process. She would read a paragraph, close her eyes as if memorizing it, then write it down in careful script. At the top of her notebook page, he could see she had written Day 47, Business Strategy Fundamentals. The empty stomach symphony, just as Jonathan was debating whether to introduce himself. Celeste's stomach produced a sound that seemed to echo through the quiet library. She immediately looked around, embarrassed, and pressed both hands against her abdomen. Jonathan watched as she took a long drink of water and returned to her copying. But he had seen something in that moment that made his chest tighten. He recognized the look. It was the same expression his mother had worn during the year after his father left, when she would tell him she was not hungry so he could have a larger portion. It was the look of someone making sacrifices that should not have to be made. Test of character, Jonathan walked to the library's small cafe and bought 2 sandwiches, a bag of chips, and 2 bottles of water. His plan was simple: approach the young woman, offer food, and see if his instincts were correct. But as he walked back toward her table, he stopped. Something about her dignity made him reconsider his approach. She had not asked for help, and he sensed that charity might offend rather than assist. Instead, he took a seat at a nearby table and opened one of the sandwiches. The smell of turkey and Swiss cheese filled the air around them. He watched as Celeste's concentration wavered for just a moment, her eyes flicking toward the food before returning to her notebook with renewed determination. The generous accident. Jonathan made his decision. He stood up, gathered his things as if preparing to leave, and then executed what he hoped would look like a clumsy accident. As he passed Celeste's table, he knocked over his bag, sending the second sandwich and bag of chips tumbling to the floor near her feet. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he said, reaching down to collect his things. "How clumsy of me." Celeste looked up for the first time, and Jonathan found himself looking into the most intelligent brown eyes he had ever seen. There was curiosity there, and kindness, but also a wariness that spoke of hard-won experience. "No problem at all," she said softly, helping him gather the scattered items. "I'm afraid the food hit the floor," Jonathan said, examining the sandwich with exaggerated concern. "I hate to waste it, but I suppose I can't eat it now. Unless... ... He paused as if struck by a sudden idea. "You wouldn't be interested in it, would you? I hate throwing away perfectly good food." The pride and the hunger still stared at the sandwich in its clear wrapper. It looked perfect, untouched by its brief contact with the clean library floor. Her mouth watered involuntarily. But her pride fought back just as strongly. "It's very kind," she said carefully, "but I couldn't take your food." "Please," Jonathan said, and something in his voice made her look at him more closely. "I buy lunch for my assistant every day, and yesterday I bought too much. This would actually be helping me out. I feel terrible about wasting food when there are people who could use it." It was the magic phrase. Celeste had been raised by her grandmother Rosa, who had lived through the Depression and had taught her that wasting food was a sin. If accepting the sandwich would prevent waste, then perhaps it was acceptable. "Well," she said slowly, "if you're sure you don't want it." "Completely sure," Jonathan said, placing the sandwich and chips on her table. "I'm Jonathan, by the way." "Celeste," she replied, wrapping the sandwich with hands that trembled slightly. The conversation that changed everything as Celeste ate. Jonathan found himself drawn into conversation with her. She was 22 years old, had been supporting herself since 18, and was conducting what she called independent study in business and economics. She spoke about market theory and consumer psychology with the passion of someone who had discovered fire. "Most people think business is just about making money," she said between bites, "but it's really about solving problems. Every successful company exists because it makes someone's life better in some way." Jonathan nodded, impressed by her insight. "Where did you study this?" Here Celeste said, gesturing around the library. "And online, when I can get computer access, and by watching people, listening to how they talk about what they need and want." "Have you thought about going to college?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Celeste's expression grew distant. "College requires money I don't have, and stability I can't promise," she said simply. "But knowledge doesn't require enrollment. It just requires curiosity and persistence." Revelation. As their conversation continued, Jonathan began to understand the scope of Celeste's situation. She had been living in her car for 8 months, ever since losing her apartment when her part-time job ended. She worked weekends at a small cafe but spent her weekdays here, teaching herself everything she could about business, technology, and economics. "Why business?" he asked. "Because understanding how the world works gives you power to change it," she said. "I want to create something that matters, something that helps people who are in situations like mine." Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest. Here was someone who had every reason to be bitter, to give up, to accept limitations. Instead, she was using her circumstances as motivation to learn and grow and dream. The decision when Celeste excused herself to use the restroom, Jonathan quickly wrote his business card on a piece of paper and left it beside her notebook. But then he thought better of it and took it back. She had not asked for his help, and he sensed that any offer would need to be framed carefully to preserve her dignity. Instead, he waited. When she returned, he continued their conversation about business strategy and market innovation. He found himself sharing stories from his own company, describing challenges they were facing, and asking for her thoughts. Her responses were insightful and creative, often approaching problems from angles his MBA-educated team had never considered. Proposals the afternoon wore on, Jonathan made a decision that would change both their lives. "Celeste," he said, "I have a proposition for you." She looked up from her notebook, curiosity and caution warring in her expression. My company is working on a project to develop technology solutions for financial inclusion. We need someone who understands the real-world challenges that people face. Someone who can help us design products that actually work for people instead of just looking good in presentations. Celeste said nothing, waiting. I'd like to offer you a consulting position. Part-time to start with flexible hours so you can continue your studies here. Wow. The pay would be enough to get you stable housing and food, with performance bonuses based on the value of your contributions. The moment of truth, Celeste stared at him for a long moment. You don't even know my last name, she said finally. Rivera, Jonathan said. You wrote it on your notebook, and I know you've been studying business strategy for at least 47 days. I know you think about problems in ways that can help millions of people, and I know you turned a chance encounter into an hour of the most interesting conversation I've had in months. Celeste closed her notebook slowly. Why are you doing this? 'Cause Jonathan said, choosing his words carefully. The best business decisions aren't always the safest ones. They're the ones that recognize potential where others see problems. And because I think we could help each other create something remarkable. The library was beginning to fill with the afternoon crowd, students claiming tables for evening study sessions, parents with small children, elderly people settling in with their daily newspapers. Around them, the quiet hum of learning and discovery continued. Just as it had for decades, Celeste looked around at the space that had been her sanctuary. Her classroom, her escape from a world that often seemed designed to keep people like her on the margins. Then she looked back at Jonathan, this stranger who had seen something in her that she was only beginning to believe in herself. When would I start? She asked. 3 days later, Celeste stood outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Blake Innovations. She had spent 2 nights at a budget motel, the first real bed she had slept in for months, paid for by the advance Jonathan had insisted on giving her. Her car was safely parked in a real parking spot instead of hidden behind a gas station. For the first time in almost a year, she had woken up without immediately calculating how many hours until her next meal. She wore her only professional outfit, a navy blazer and skirt set she had found at a thrift store 3 months ago, but had been saving for job interviews that never came. Her notebook was tucked under her arm, along with a folder containing every idea she had developed during her months of library research. Meeting the team. David Park, Jonathan's assistant, met her in the lobby. He was a friendly man in his late 20s with an easy smile and the kind of energy that suggested he genuinely enjoyed his work. You must be Celeste, he said, extending his hand. Jonathan told me to expect someone extraordinary. But he didn't mention you'd be carrying what looks like a thesis under your arm. Celeste smiled nervously. I like to be prepared. That's going to fit right in here, David said, leading her toward the elevators. Half our team are reformed overachievers who still color-code their calendars. As they rode up to the 15th floor, David explained the company structure. Blake Innovations focused on developing technology solutions for underserved markets, with current projects ranging from mobile banking, apps for developing countries, to educational platforms for remote communities. Jonathan started the company because he believed technology should solve real problems for real people. Not just make life easier for people who already have it easy, David explained, which is why your perspective is going to be invaluable. Conference room challenge. Jonathan was waiting in a bright conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. With him were 3 other team members: Jennifer Walsh, the head of product development; Michael Santos, the lead software engineer; and Patricia Kumar, the marketing director. Celeste, Jonathan said, standing as she entered. Welcome to Blake Innovations. I hope you're ready to jump right in. I've been ready for months, she replied, taking a seat at the polished conference table. Jennifer leaned forward. Jonathan tells us you have insights into financial inclusion that could help us redesign our mobile banking platform. We've been struggling with user adoption in low-income communities. Celeste opened her notebook. May I ask what your current user research looks like? Michael pulled up a presentation on the wall screen. We surveyed 500 people in target demographics, conducted focus groups in 3 cities, and analyzed usage data from our beta test. Celeste studied the charts and graphs for several minutes. This is thorough, she said finally. but it's missing something crucial. What's that? Patricia asked. The research was conducted during business hours, in formal settings, with people who had time to participate in surveys and focus groups. You're missing the voices of people who work multiple jobs, who don't have reliable childcare, who are suspicious of institutions that want their personal information. The room fell quiet. Jennifer and Michael exchanged glances. What do you suggest? Jonathan asked. The real-world education, let me show you, Celeste said. But not here. We need to go where the people are. An hour later, the entire team found themselves in the food court of a downtown mall, sitting at plastic tables with their laptops and notepads. Celeste had convinced them to conduct what she called guerrilla user research. See that woman over there? Celeste pointed discreetly to a middle-aged woman counting coins before ordering food. She's making financial decisions in real time, under pressure, with limited resources. That's your target user, not someone sitting comfortably in a focus group room. She approached the woman politely, explaining that they were students working on a project about everyday money management. Within minutes, she had learned that the woman, named Carmen, worked 3 part-time jobs, sent money to family in another state, and had been burned by bank fees so many times that she only used cash. Banks say they want to help people like me, Carmen told them, but their apps are designed by people who have never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. The breakthrough insight, back at the office that afternoon, the team was energized in a way Jennifer had never seen before. They had spent 3 hours talking to real people about real problems, and their entire approach to the project had shifted. The issue isn't just user interface, Celeste explained, drawing diagrams on the whiteboard. It's trust, timing, and understanding the emotional relationship people have with money when they don't have enough of it. She outlined her vision. Instead of another banking app, she should create what she called a financial confidence platform. It would combine basic banking services with educational content, community support, and tools specifically designed for people living paycheck to paycheck. Most financial apps assume people want to save and invest, she said. But what if we create a one that first helps people survive, then gradually helps them thrive? Michael was already taking notes. He could build in features for irregular income, bill juggling, emergency fund building, and microlearning modules, Patricia added, delivered when people are actually making financial decisions. The unexpected opposition, the excitement in the room was infectious, but it was interrupted when Monica Chen, the head of business development, arrived for a previously scheduled meeting. Monica was brilliant, ambitious, and had never liked the company's focus on underserved markets. Jonathan, she said, barely acknowledging the rest of the team, I hope you're not planning to pivot our entire mobile banking strategy based on mall food court conversations? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Monica, Jonathan said carefully, I'd like you to meet Celeste Rivera, our new consultant on financial inclusion. Monica's eyes swept over Celeste, taking in her thrift store outfit and well-worn notebook. I see. And what exactly are her qualifications for reshaping our product strategy? Celeste felt every eye in the room turn to her. This was the moment. She had been dreading when someone would ask for credentials she did not have, degrees she had never earned, experiences she could not claim. I have a PhD in being broke, she said quietly. 8 months of field research and financial desperation, and enough motivation to spend 47 consecutive days teaching myself business strategy because I believe knowledge could change my life. Monica's expression did not soften. It's very inspiring, but we're not running a charity here. I need someone with actual experience in product development, market analysis, user experience design. You're right, Celeste said, standing up. I don't have those credentials, but I have something else. The moment of truth, Celeste walked to the whiteboard and began drawing. Her hand moved quickly, sketching out a complete user journey map that connected emotional states to financial behaviors to product features. Your current app assumes people make rational financial decisions, she said as she drew. But when you have $17 until payday and your car needs gas to get to work, rational goes out the window. You need an app that understands panic, that anticipates desperate decisions, that provides support instead of judgment. She turned to face Monica directly. You want market analysis? People in financial stress check their bank balance an average of 12 times per day. It's not because they don't remember the number, but because they're hoping it might have changed. They need micro-affirmations, not just transactions. The room was completely silent as Celeste continued drawing, creating a framework that connected psychological insights to technical solutions. You want user experience design? Every button, every screen, every notification should answer one question. Will this make someone feel more or less ashamed of their financial situation? Because shame is what keeps people from using financial services, and shame is what keeps them trapped. The partnership proposal, when Celeste finished, Monica studied the whiteboard for a long moment. The diagram was more comprehensive than anything their consulting firm had produced, and it addressed problems their team had been struggling with for months. This is actually quite sophisticated, Monica admitted grudgingly. But can you execute on it? Not alone, Celeste said. But with this team, absolutely. Jonathan stepped forward. Monica, I'd like to propose something instead of outsourcing this project to another consulting firm. What if we developed it internally with Celeste leading the user research and strategy development? Monica raised an eyebrow. You want to bet $1 million product launch on someone with no formal business experience? I want to bet on someone who understands our users better than anyone else in this room, Jonathan replied. Including me, the test project after. An hour of negotiation, they reached a compromise. Celeste would have 4 weeks to develop a complete strategy and prototype for the financial confidence platform. If the board approved it, she would become the project director with a full-time position and equity in the company. If not, she would receive payment for her consulting work and a recommendation letter. For weeks, Monica said, full market analysis, user research, technical specifications, and a working prototype. Deal, Celeste said without hesitation. As the meeting broke up, David approached her with a concerned expression. 4 weeks is incredibly tight for what they're asking. I know, Celeste said, gathering her things. But I've been preparing for this opportunity my entire life. Just didn't know it until now. The growing connection that evening, Jonathan offered to drive Celeste back to her motel. As they sat in traffic, he found himself stealing glances at her profile. She was reviewing her notes from the day, making additional sketches and observations, with the focused intensity he had first noticed in the library. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. What you did in that meeting with Monica, where did that confidence come from? A week ago, you were worried about spending $12 on food. Celeste looked up from her notebook. Desperation teaches you to fight for what matters. For 8 months, I've been invisible, dismissed, overlooked. Today was the first time in almost a year that someone challenged my ideas instead of my right to have them. They rode in comfortable silence for several minutes. Jonathan, Celeste said as they pulled into the motel parking lot.
Yes.
You for seeing something in me that I was starting to forget was there? As she got out of the car, Jonathan realized that helping Celeste was changing him as much as it was changing her. For the first time in years, he was excited about going to work. Not because of profit projections or market share, but because they were building something that could genuinely help people. He watched her walk toward her motel room notebook, still clutched in her hand, and knew that his life had been permanently altered by their chance encounter in the library. The next 4 weeks, blurred together in a whirlwind of 18-hour days, endless research, and the kind of focused determination that only comes from knowing everything depends on success. Celeste had moved from the motel to a small, furnished apartment that Jonathan helped her find, but she spent most of her time at the office. Surrounded by whiteboards covered in user flow diagrams and sticky notes with insights from her ongoing field research, she had recruited a network of volunteers from community centers, homeless shelters, and social service organizations. People who had never been asked their opinion about financial technology suddenly found themselves as paid consultants, sharing their experiences and testing early prototypes of what Celeste was calling the LifeSync platform David had become her unofficial research partner, driving her to interviews in neighborhoods that most tech companies never visited. Together, they talked to single mothers juggling multiple jobs, recent immigrants trying to navigate the banking system, elderly people on fixed incomes, and young adults aging out of foster care. The prototype takes shape by the third week. Michael had built a working prototype based on Celeste's specifications. The app looked nothing like traditional banking software. Instead of intimidating financial jargon, it used simple language and visual cues. Instead of shame-inducing notifications about low balances, it offered encouraging messages and practical suggestions. The core innovation was what Celeste called emotional banking. The app recognized patterns that indicated financial stress and responded with support rather than penalties. If someone was checking their balance repeatedly, it offered budgeting tips and connected them with community resources. If they were making small, frequent transactions, it suggested ways to reduce fees and build emergency savings. It's not just managing money, Celeste explained to Professor Williams, her former economics teacher who had become an informal mentor. It's managing the anxiety, shame, and fear that come with not having enough money. Professor Williams had been following Celeste's journey since she disappeared from his community college classes 8 months earlier. When she reached out for advice on her project, he was amazed by how much she had learned and grown. "You've taken everything I taught about behavioral economics and applied it in ways I never imagined," he told her. "This could genuinely change how financial services work." The personal stakes as the deadline approached, the professional pressure was matched by growing personal tension between Celeste and Jonathan. They were spending 12 hours a day together, working late into the evening, sharing meals and ideas and dreams for what the platform could become. The attraction had been there from the beginning, but now it was complicated by their working relationship and the power dynamic of her depending on him for this opportunity. Celeste was determined not to let personal feelings compromise her professional credibility, especially with Monica watching for any sign that she was not taking the project seriously. "We need to talk about what happens after the presentation," Jonathan said one evening, as they sat in his office reviewing final preparations. "What do you mean?" Celeste asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "You know what I mean? This thing between us? We can't keep pretending it's not there." Celeste closed her laptop and looked at him directly. "Jonathan, in 2 days I'm either going to be your colleague or unemployed again. Either way, this has to stay professional until we know how the story ends, and then we'll see." The board presentation, the morning of the presentation. Celeste woke up in her small apartment and put on the one professional dress she had bought with her first paycheck. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized. 4 weeks ago, she had been a woman with nothing to lose. Today, she was a woman with everything to gain or lose. The Blake Innovations boardroom was intimidating, with 12 executives in expensive suits sitting around a polished table that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Monica sat at the far end, her expression neutral, but her body language suggesting she expected disappointment. "Good morning," Celeste began, her voice steadier than she felt. "For weeks ago, you challenged me to prove that someone without formal business training could develop a product strategy for financial inclusion. Today I'm here to show you that the question was backwards." She clicked to her first slide, which showed a photo of Carmen, the woman they had met in the mall food court. "The question isn't whether I'm qualified to understand your users. The question is whether your users can trust you to understand them." The presentation that changed everything for the next 45 minutes. Celeste took the board through a journey that began with real stories from real people and ended with a comprehensive business plan that projected significant revenue growth. Alongside genuine social impact, she demonstrated the working prototype, showing how it guided users through financial decisions with empathy rather than judgment. She presented user testing data that showed 89% satisfaction rates among beta testers, compared to 34% for traditional banking apps. But the most powerful moment came when she brought Carmen into the presentation via video call. To the board about how the prototype had helped her organize her finances, build her first emergency fund, and feel confident about money for the first time in her adult life. "This app doesn't make me feel stupid," Carmen said. "It makes me feel capable." When the presentation ended, the room was silent for a long moment. Then the chairman of the board, an elderly man named Robert Sterling, began asking detailed questions about implementation, market size, and scaling potential. The decision after an hour of questions and discussion. The board asked Celeste to step outside while they deliberated. She sat in the hallway with David, trying not to pace or check her phone every 30 seconds. "Whatever happens," David said, "you've already won. You've proven that you belong here." 20 minutes later, Jonathan emerged from the boardroom with an expression she could not read. "Well?" she asked. "The board approved the project for full development with a $2 million initial budget," he said. "They want you as project director with a starting salary of $120,000 plus equity." Celeste felt her knees go weak. "Are you serious?" "There's one condition." Her heart sank. "What?" "Monica wants to be your business development partner. She was impressed by your work and wants to help scale it nationally." The new beginning that evening, the entire team celebrated at a restaurant. Near the office, Celeste found herself surrounded by colleagues who had become friends, toasting a future that had seemed impossible just a month before. But the moment she had been waiting for came later, when she and Jonathan walked slowly back to the office parking garage. "So," he said, "the project is approved. You're officially my colleague. And Monica is no longer questioning your qualifications. So now we can have that conversation." Celeste stopped walking and turned to face him. "What conversation?" "One where I tell you that working with you these past 4 weeks has been the best month of my professional life. The one where I admit that I'm completely in love with you and have been since you explained consumer psychology while eating a sandwich in the library." Celeste felt her heart skip several beats. "Jonathan." "The one where I ask if you might be interested in exploring what happens when two people who respect each other's minds also happen to be falling for each other." Instead of answering with words, Celeste stepped closer and kissed him. Soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she felt him respond. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "I have to warn you," she said. "I'm probably going to be a terrible girlfriend. I work too much. I talk to myself when I'm thinking through problems, and I still get anxious in expensive restaurants." "I have to warn you," he replied. "I'm probably going to fall more in love with you every day. I'm going to want to support your dreams even when they scare me. I'm going to expect you to call me out when I'm being privileged or oblivious." Deal 6. Months later, the LifeSync platform launched to national attention. With features in major publications and interest from banks and credit unions across the country, Celeste had become a sought-after speaker on financial inclusion and had been invited to testify before Congress about technology solutions for economic inequality. But the moment that meant the most to her came on a Tuesday morning when she received a text message from Carmen. "Use the app to save enough for my daughter's school supplies. She doesn't have to feel embarrassed this year. Thank you for seeing us." Celeste was sitting in her new office, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the library where her life had changed. On her desk was a small plant that David had given her as a congratulations gift, and a framed photo of her and Jonathan at the company holiday party. She had kept the notebook where she had first written, Day 47, Business Strategy, Fundamentals. Now it sat next to reports showing that LifeSync had helped over 50,000 people improve their financial situations in its first 6 months. The proposal on the 1-year anniversary of their first meeting, Jonathan suggested they visit the library where it all began. Celeste agreed, thinking it would be a sweet nostalgic gesture. When they arrived, she was surprised to find the same corner table where she used to study, now decorated with flowers and surrounded by familiar faces. David was there, along with Professor Williams, Carmen, and her daughter, and several of the LifeSync beta testers who had become friends. "What is this?" Celeste asked. Jonathan took her hand and led her to the table where a single book was placed. A first-edition copy of The Theory of Moral Sentiments by Adam Smith. "1 year ago," he said, "I found you here choosing knowledge over comfort, dreams over security. You taught me that the best investments aren't in stocks or bonds, but in people and their potential." He opened the book to reveal a ring nestled in a cutout section of the pages. "Celeste Rivera, you've already changed my life, my company, and thousands of other lives. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life supporting your dreams?" Through tears, Celeste looked around at all the faces of people whose lives had intersected with hers. People who had believed in her when she was still learning to believe in herself. "Yes," she said, "but only if you promise we'll keep working together to prove that everyone deserves a second chance." As applause filled the quiet library, Celeste realized that her story was no longer about surviving or even succeeding. It was about the radical act of using your own transformation to transform the world around you. The girl who once chose books over bread had become a woman who chose to ensure that no one else would have to make that choice. And in the process, she had found not just professional success, but a love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the unshakable belief that two people together could change more than either could accomplish alone. The library where she had once felt invisible had become the place where she learned that being seen, truly seen, was the beginning of every kind of magic. The end.